I feel after all these years, my breakthrough discovery is human beings. They're a remarkable species, and maybe we ought to find out what they can do and what we can do for each other. I started this work, I should say, coming out of the civil rights movement, having launched legal services for those who could not afford lawyers, and realizing that our ability to use advocacy to get the government and to arouse the conscience of this nation, we were winning battles, but we were really losing the war. And so I asked myself, what was the most significant thing that we could do to really affect social change? And I decided that probably the most important thing I could do was try and figure out a way that human beings for whom the market might have no use and labor that the market did not value could become valued, and those human beings could define themselves as contributors, because otherwise they were supplicants begging for the crumbs off the table. And that led me to Time Dollars and to developing a system. And I must say, none of this would have been possible before the advent of the personal computer and now of the internet. If you try and leaf through 20 index cards to find somebody who's available Tuesday night, who can be with your mother who has Alzheimer's but also smokes and only speaks Portuguese and is on the second floor, by the time you're through 20 index cards, you're in trouble. And the ability to make instantaneous searches of the kinds of databases that come in, and we've found very friendly ways of enabling us to get that data, makes a huge difference. Initially, member to member, or this kind of a small, I'll call it multi-purpose, all-purpose babysitting pool, may sound tame, but it is in fact will be a key to dealing with aging baby boomers who will have elder parents they have to take care of and elder partners, and who I think are the great untapped wealth of the future in terms of dealing with our social problems. In Lynn, Massachusetts, the Department of Mental Retardation is funding a time bank program because it knows that if we label people mentally retarded, you can't get them rides, but we don't really have to give IQ tests to people to give them rides. And the whole notion of how do we rebuild community, so they're investing in that. In Houston, it's evacuees from Hurricane Katrina whom the city is having difficulty integrating with the rest of the community, and is using time banks to begin to knit them together. The University of Utah in Salt Lake City is finding that it can't integrate foreign students and link them with the students who are coming from Salt Lake City, and they are large refugee settlements that it wants to enable them to earn time dollars to use for tuition credits so that they can have a path to university. I simply want to say that what we're finding is that the uses of this kind of building relationship software and this kind of focus on building relationships is not just tame, let's have, let's everybody smile at each other and the world will be better, but rather it's really redefining human beings whom the society really tosses on the scrap heap. And it turns them from being the problems, the needy people, the clients, the target population, into something radically different. In Washington, D.C., we're running now a youth court with Time Dollars where kids sit on a jury and are empowered by the court to hear cases of nonviolent arrests. We're handling 70% of all nonviolent arrests in Washington, D.C., but most of the kids who come before the youth court as offenders are sentenced not only to community service and restitution, they are also sentenced to jury duty. So the whole system now is being run about 99% by offenders, and they have been able to cut the recidivism rate by over 50%. So we're not talking about a minor change. In Chicago, we dealt with special education students who were earning Time Dollars tutoring first and second graders and finding out that they were not stupid. But because they thought they were stupid, they made brilliant tutors because first and second grade homework looked simple to them. So they said, I'm stupid. If I can do this, anybody can do this, so I'm not letting you off the hook. So they leveled non-negotiable expectations on those first and second graders, and lo and behold, the first and second graders responded to those because they desperately wanted the approval of an older kid. But what the older kids didn't know is it takes higher order problem-solving skills to teach lower order skills. So in the process, they learn remarkable things like, as one told me, I learned to repeat the question of my tutee before I answered it to make sure I understood it. And there's another one, and I could give you a long list of things they told me, but the last thing that really stuck in my head was when one told me, I learned there were words inside of words. These are the throwaway kids. And in Washington, D.C., 17% of the kids who enter elementary school by 5th or 6th grade are labeled special ed, and we lose 40% of them right now, but who never graduate from high school. So we're talking about how do we begin to honor the assets, how do we begin to honor the capacity of every human being. One thing that we're all here learning is that that money is simply a human artifact. And when you change the characteristics of money, of a currency, you change the dynamics that flow from that currency, and in the process you expand the range of the possible beyond what we thought was possible when we looked through the lens of money. Most community currencies, all to my knowledge, have eliminated interest. Well, interest is what turns a medium of exchange into a commodity that's worth more as a commodity that you can save and invest in, and it supposedly works for you, than it does as a medium of exchange. And we learned when we studied the use of cigarettes as a currency in prisoner war camps during World War II, what happens when there's a conflict between the role of a medium of exchange as a commodity versus its role as a medium of exchange to generate exchanges and to enable people to work together. I simply want to say that Time Dollars tackled and focused on two critical characteristics of money that I thought were really important. One was, the most important one probably was price. And people said, you know, how can you mess with price? And I began to look at that, and I began to understand that price for us defines value in the market. And as a thing becomes more scarce relative to demand, value goes up, price goes up, and therefore value goes up. If it's more abundant, it's less valuable. If it's truly abundant, it's either dirt cheap or worthless. And I suddenly realized that that means that everything that defines us as a human being, every capability, every capacity that enabled our species to evolve and to survive, is defined as worthless in a monetary system where value is defined by scarcity. And I said, something's wrong with that. Maybe we need to find a way of valuing those core fundamental capabilities that we all have. Our ability to come to each other's rescue, our ability to teach each other, our ability to comfort each other, our ability to stand up for what's right, to oppose what's wrong. Those basic capabilities that all of us have as human beings, that democracy itself depends upon, all of those we have and are born with, and all of those are worthless in the monetary system that functioning as it does now. So I decided I couldn't solve that problem with a pricing system that devalued everything that I thought enabled our species to survive. There are 5 kinds of labor that I identified initially that the market does not value or that it devalues in varying respects. The first you've heard about from Bob Gallant, which is the caring labor, and that we know is devalued. Second, and all that involves is raising children and building strong families and taking care of the frail and the elderly. The second is civic labor, what it takes simply to make democracy work, to get people to come out to meetings, to get them to pull together on dealing with a local problem. The third is social justice labor. That's what it took to make the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the environmental movement, and the host of other movements that we're going to need in order to address the fundamental social inequities that we have. The fifth is environmental labor, the kind of labor that it takes to recycle, the kind of labor that it's going to take to make the planet sustainable. All of that labor is viewed as, quote, volunteer labor. And the fifth kind of labor is the lifelong learning that each of us is having to learn just to find out what foods we shouldn't be eating, what medicines we shouldn't be taking, but that starts at age 3 and 4 or earlier and is a continuing process and enable those 5th and 6th graders to mentor those 1st and 2nd graders. So you got 5 kinds of labor at least that we know that we can reward with time banking in a way that says you matter. When people said to me, well, you know, nobody would accept that, I still remember the words of one law professor who said to me, Edgar, I would do any amount of legal work for anybody if somebody would take my mother-in-law shopping. And I thought, well, that sort of deals with the issue of pricing from one perspective. The second characteristic of money that we stripped away was money is backed by a legal obligation. Somebody owes you a debt, you can go into court and sue them. And so, or if somebody does something to you and they've interfered with your right to something, to payment or to goods or services, you can sue for either injunctive relief or for damages. I don't know many lawyers who can afford a lawyer. And I don't know, most of us can't wait 6 years until we get redress. And it was clear to me that there are systems of obligation and mutuality. There are systems of ridicule and of ostracism, of acceptance and rejection and censure that go back before the formal legal systems that depend on rules and precedent and the fictional reconstruction of past events through an evidentiary grid that rules out large amounts of relevant evidence. Most of my colleagues in law do not appreciate this statement, but I'm simply going to say that we decided that you could not sue on a time dollar debt. Those 2 characteristics were sufficient to get us the IRS ruling that time dollars are tax exempt, and sufficient to address some of the, to make clear to me that we were dealing here in an economic realm that was different from the monetary realm. The minute you enter a formal monetary realm backed by legal requirements, you not only enter the world of tax, but you enter to a remarkable degree fixation on liability that we all know about and are scared about. And it's not that I'm not afraid of liability, it's just that I don't think our species would have survived if before we had our first date we had to get an FBI check and do, you know, and take out risk insurance. Somehow I don't think we would never ever have had that first date, okay? So there are rules that apply in the world of money that don't seem to apply in the world of family and informal relationships and social relationships. It's a little bit like saying, well, we really, before we let that bird land in the wetland, we better require it to file an environmental impact statement. Don't think that's going to work either. So I'm saying that there are separate spheres of activity. Those link, it's a continuum, they're not fully separable. Schumacher's wrestling with that, all of us are wrestling with how you bridge those worlds, because, you know, we may have had clean air and clean water before we messed it up, and we may have had viable families and neighborhoods before we messed it up, but it's going to take partnerships. It's going to take the monetary world, it's going to take partnerships with the world of business, of government, of nonprofits, in partnership with what I call the core economy of family, neighborhood, and community, to begin to restore what is really our habitat, the ecological sphere that we as a species need, and that's what we're really talking about rebuilding with complementary currency. We need that kind of partnership. There was an interesting book that I read in England about why systems fail and what governments have to learn. And in the preface there was this observation: you can deliver packages and you can deliver pizza, but you can't deliver education and health, and I would add, and you can't deliver community. All of those things require the enlistment and the labor of the persons whom you're, quote, helping and reaching out to as participants. Now, most of us who get into this work are really good because we're driven by a desire to make a difference in the world, are really good at saying, can I help you? And we have a whole array of social interventions funded by foundations, by charity, by entitlement programs that say, do you have a problem? How can I help you? And in case you hadn't noticed, all of the billions that we spend on helping people has not created a constituency for social justice, has not created a constituency that seems to really care about or is committed to addressing those problems, because people have given up. They say, why throw good money after bad? Well, I'm going to tell you something about one-way interventions. When I say, can I help you, I really mean it. But most of us have had the experience of having somebody ask us, well, what can I do for you? And we say something like, it was a privilege to help you, or pass it on, which has about a 2 to 3 minute life expectancy. And I've said, realize that we're sending two messages when we engage in this unilateral helping that we don't mean to send. The first message that we're sending is, I have something you need, but you have nothing that I need or want or value. And the second message that we're sending in unilateral acts of helping is, if you want more of my help, come back with a bigger problem. And then we wonder why those attempts to help don't solve those problems. People know if their problems are the only assets we respect, they know how to grow those assets. And so we need to begin thinking about how we build reciprocity into all of our transactions. And I'm saying that's as true in time banking, but it's true in all the complementary currencies. The idea of pay it forward is a critically important piece that's built into currency, and that we need to begin embedding in all of our attempts to make something different happen. If there was one thing that I learned, it was that we are really trying to build or rebuild a core economy which is not on the radar screens. When an economist